KTRS. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we check in with Tony Messenger. And you read him, stltoday.com, and at that newspaper that you still get at your doorstep. Good morning, Tony Messenger.
Never to be confused with an Olympic athlete.
Never. That is you and me both, yes.
Although, if you've watched the curling, I think my wife and I were talking the other day. We both used to be pretty good at shuffleboard in our neighborhood bar back in the day. I think I could be an Olympic curler if I really put my mind and effort to it.
I think, first of all, neither one of these comments are meant to make fun of curling, because curling, people make a lot of grief about curling, but it is a very skilled sport.
Very skilled.
But I really think bar shuffleboard should be an Olympic sport, and Phil Menino out in Cottleville would earn the gold medal every year. Some of those people in those bars really know how to play shuffleboard.
Oh, they're really good.
Yeah.
They're really good.
Yeah.
And I think the drinking should go along with it. I mean, that's what would make it an Olympic sport.
I think
that ability to perform under pressure while also consuming alcoholic beverages.
With that being said, darts should
legally, of course.
Darts should be an Olympic sport.
The movie's called Beer Fest, fellas. It's called Beer Fest. Okay, go to Germany.
All right, fair enough. Tony, it came out in the last 24 hours that the Russian bots helped gin up some civil unrest down in Missouri a couple of years ago during the protests. So what are we to believe? How much of that was real? How much of that was totally and completely fake and created by Russia to sow discourse in this country?
Well, this is the concern when you're talking about the social media and what the Russians have done in terms of our election, in terms of trying to sow civil unrest. Their plan is to just create sort of madness, create unrest, create dissension, and they've done so effectively and ultimately for an electoral goal. I mean, they're doing it to create an electoral goal. And one of the things that a gentleman from the military wrote a paper about his study of what happened at Mizzou during the protests, and some of that unrest was stirred by Russians to create black-white conflict, and that's really unfortunate. And I think we also know they've studied that has happened in the Russian bots have been active after shootings. They've been active after other civil unrest situations. The lesson is that people need to be a little bit more careful and thoughtful about the things that they share on social media. I've got a friend who's a professor on the Illinois side of the river who teaches media consumption and is constantly explaining to people how you identify what's a mainstream news source that is likely legitimate and what is the stuff out there on Facebook that isn't real. And people don't know. And part of the problem that we have in this current cycle that we're dealing with politically is that the mainstream media is under attack as part of a political activity. And so it makes it even harder to then determine what's real and what isn't real. No doubt the unrest that happened, the causes of the racial discord that happened at the University of Missouri was as real as what happened in this city post-Ferguson and post-Jason Stockley. But some of the allegations about KKK riding through town and those sorts of things, those were made up by the Russians, and people bought into it real quickly, and then in some cases very quickly realized, oh, wait, that meme that I'm sending around isn't real. We see that. I guarantee you that some of that has happened after yesterday's horrific Florida shooting. Those things happen every single time that the social media gets really hot dealing with news, and people need to just be a little bit careful, a little bit thoughtful, and when they see something that should trigger an innate sense that, is this real? Could this really be happening? What's the news source? Why am I not seeing this anywhere else? That should trigger something that says, wait a minute, I'm backing off from this. I'm not just going to believe this crazy conspiracy theory.
Well, first of all, when I run into college kids, high school kids, and they ask me to come speak and talk and whatever else, and you ask them, hey, where do you get your news? They look at their feet and they say, Facebook. And you understand that's not a news source. Facebook doesn't count. And they look at you.
But it is these days.
Well, but they look at you like you have two heads. Like, what do you mean I get my news from Facebook? They don't understand that Facebook isn't a real entity in terms of news gathering.
Right, but so here's how it happens in my house. So my 12-year-old is on Snapchat and Instagram and gets I don't even know exactly how those two services work that well because I have them on my phone,
right,
but I don't spend that much time in them. But he's constantly, if we're sitting there watching TV and I'm on my phone on Twitter, we're watching the Olympics and I'm on my phone on Twitter and he's on his phone on Instagram and Snapchat, and we're both doing the same thing. Did you hear about the Cleveland Cavaliers trade? And he's getting it through Snapchat and Instagram links, and I'm getting it through Twitter links. And then the question just becomes, what's the underlying source? And in this particular case, we're both dealing with sports things. Our underlying source is generally the same. But that's the question that people have to ask. When they're getting their news from social media, follow the source through. What's the underlying source? If your political news started at Gateway Pundit, it's not actual news. It doesn't matter if you saw it on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Follow it through. And the danger we have as a democratic society right now is that for a large segment of the political world, the mainstream media, well, that's fake news.
Right.
It's not.
Well,
and it's not fake news when they need the mainstream media to be on their side. Well, that's what's really damning and damaging to our democracy right now is this constant barrage of attacks on the mainstream media and trying to make it out like people shouldn't get their news from there.
But Missouri's protests would have been a much different story if it were without any Russian influence, right?
That's not what that story said.
Well,
because the story was focusing on a couple of very specific memes that sought to divide people by race at a specific time. And it definitely said that during those couple of specific days, there were moments on social media that people were sharing things that were inaccurate. But go back to and remember what we're talking about here. The hunger strike was real. The resignation of the president of the university was real. The people gathering in public spaces complaining about historic racism at the campus, that was all real. It's a couple of the memes and conspiracy theories that happened during the time in which Russian bots were encouraging it to make it worse. There was a problem there, and we don't know how much that contributed. That's true. We don't know how much that contributed.
We don't know. We could debate this for an hour, and we don't have time, and we would agree and disagree to certain parts of this. But at least give me that the Russian bots poured gasoline on a brush fire and made it worse.
They did, and that's what they were trying to do. And the same thing they did during our election. People didn't send their kids down to people didn't send their kids to school in Columbia because of this, right? I mean, the football coach had some issues. The football team didn't. There were massive repercussions from that, and we were sort of duped. It was a problem. It was an issue, but was it a national story that deserved, the football coach resigning? Not that was the reason why he resigned, but I mean, there was some. Oh, it was a national story. I would maintain yes, it was and is a national story and continues to be an issue at the University of Missouri in St. Louis. It's not like this new civil rights movement that has been rekindled over the last few years has all of a sudden been fixed and everything's great. It's still an issue. There are still ongoing issues related to that. But this Russian bot thing is serious. We got another election coming up this year, and we have our intelligence officials nationally saying they're planning to and will be involved in that election, and we have a presidential apparatus who doesn't care.
Tony, we're going to leave it there. We are really late on time. St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist Tony Messenger, who will not be confused with an Olympic athlete. Tony.